In 1876, 1,500 Lakota warriors faced just 600 U.S. soldiers at the Little Bighorn River, where 70 acres of Lakota tipis stood defiant. George Armstrong Custer, saber raised in his buckskin coat, led his men to ruin. A Lakota warrior recalled, "We charged and overwhelmed them in under an hour." Historian D. Brown wrote, "Custer's ambition crumbled against Sitting Bull's resolve." How did this native victory, against staggering odds, alter the course of American history? Watch to uncover the truth. On the dusty banks of the Yellowstone River in eastern Montana, the U.S. 7th Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, stood guard over a team of engineers. These men, equipped with theodolites and chains, were tasked with surveying a railroad line to carve through the Great Plains, a project meant to bind the nation's frontier to its industrial heart. In 1873, the Northern Pacific Railroad aimed to stretch 1,900 miles from Minnesota to the Pacific, but this ambition clashed with the Lakota's ancestral lands. Custer's mission was clear: protect the surveyors at all costs. Yet, as historian Robert Utley notes in the Indian Wars, the Plains tribes saw the railroad as a steel serpent threatening their way of life, setting the stage for a fierce resistance. George Armstrong Custer rode at the forefront, his buckskin coat flapping in the wind, a saber sheathed at his side, and his golden hair catching the sunlight. At 33 years old, Custer was a celebrated figure, having earned fame as a Civil War hero. His 600-man regiment, clad in blue wool uniforms, marched with confidence, their Springfield rifles gleaming. Yet, Custer's ambition was not merely duty. As Evan Connell writes in Son of the Morning Star, Custer craved personal glory, dreaming of triumphs that would elevate him to national legend. This drive, however, clouded his judgment, making him underestimate the resolve of the Lakota people whose lands he now trespassed. Beside Custer rode Bloody Knife, his trusted scout, a man of mixed Arikara and Sioux heritage. Dressed in a fringed jacket, his dark hair tied back, Bloody Knife gripped his rifle with a tension born of personal vendetta. Born around 1840, he had been shunned by the Lakota, who viewed his mixed blood with disdain. According to historian Thomas Powers in The Killing of Crazy Horse, Bloody Knife's life was marked by rejection, fueling a deep resentment that drove him to serve the U.S. Army with fierce loyalty. His knowledge of the terrain was unmatched, but his heart carried a wound that no victory could heal, making him a tragic figure in this unfolding drama. As the 7th Cavalry ventured deeper into Lakota territory, Custer sensed a formidable adversary. Sitting Bull, the Hunkpapa Lakota leader, had transformed from a warrior humbled at Kildare Mountain in 1864 into a master strategist by 1873. At 42, Sitting Bull was no mere fighter. He was a spiritual and political force. Robert Utley describes him as a visionary who united tribes through diplomacy and courage. Sitting Bull's resistance was not just about battles. It was a defense of a way of life against the relentless advance of American expansion. Custer, unaware of the depth of this resolve, was stepping into a trap laid by a leader who had learned the art of war through bitter experience. Sitting Bull stood tall among his people, his eagle feather headdress swaying as he held a coup stick, a symbol of his authority. His piercing gaze rallied his warriors, some 2,000 strong across the Lakota and allied tribes. According to W. Fletcher Johnson in The Life of Sitting Bull, Sitting Bull's leadership was rooted in his unyielding belief in Lakota sovereignty. He had witnessed treaties broken and lands stolen, yet his response was not reckless anger but calculated defiance. By 1873, he had forged a coalition with other leaders, preparing to protect the plains from the railroad's encroachment. His presence on the battlefield was a beacon, signaling that the Lakota would not yield without a fight. Under Sitting Bull's command, warriors like Gaul and Crow King chose their battlegrounds with precision. They favored high ridges and open plains, where their numbers, often outmatching the cavalry by 2 to 1, could overwhelm. Gaul, a Hunkpapa warrior in his 30s, and Crow King, known for his tactical acumen, led raids that exploited the terrain. As Joseph Marshall III notes in The Journey of Crazy Horse, Lakota warfare was not chaotic, but disciplined, with warriors trained to strike swiftly and retreat before counterattacks. This strategy frustrated Custer's men, who were unaccustomed to such fluid tactics, setting the stage for a campaign marked by relentless pressure. Among the Lakota's fiercest leaders was Crazy Horse, an Oglala warrior whose braided hair was adorned with a single hawk feather. At about 33, he carried a Winchester rifle and a reputation for fearlessness. His slight frame belied a charisma that, as Marshall writes, made warriors follow him into the jaws of death. Crazy Horse's raids on Custer's forces were surgical, often targeting supply lines to weaken the cavalry's resolve. By 1873, his band of 400 warriors had joined Sitting Bull's coalition, swelling the resistance to over 3,000 fighters. Crazy Horse's presence was a constant reminder that the Lakota fought not just for land but for their identity. For weeks, Lakota warriors harassed Custer's men, riding painted ponies that blended with the rolling hills. From ravines and bluffs, they launched ambushes, firing arrows and bullets that forced the cavalry into defensive formations. The 7th Cavalry, burdened by heavy wool uniforms and 45-pound packs, struggled in the summer heat, their morale eroding with each skirmish. According to Nathaniel Philbrick in Custer's Last Stand, these attacks cost Custer's men 20 casualties and 50 horses over a month, while the Lakota lost fewer than 10. The relentless pressure exposed the cavalry's vulnerability, a fact Custer refused to acknowledge as he pressed forward. Custer's frustration grew palpable as he shouted orders to regroup, his saber flashing in the sunlight. His men, numbering 600, were spread thin across miles of rugged terrain, their cohesion faltering under Lakota raids. Connell observes that Custer's hunger for fame led him to dismiss the growing threat, believing his regiment invincible. This overconfidence blinded him to the reality that Sitting Bull's warriors were not merely resisting but outmaneuvering him. Each failed advance deepened Custer's resolve to crush the Lakota, a decision that would prove catastrophic in the weeks to come. The Yellowstone Expedition collapsed under Sitting Bull's resistance, halting the Northern Pacific Railroad's progress. By 1873, the surveyors, protected by 1,500 troops, had mapped only 200 miles of the planned 1,900-mile route before abandoning the effort. Sitting Bull's 3,000 warriors had disrupted a project critical to American expansion, costing investors millions. As Scott Reynolds Nelson details in The Great Depression of 1873, this failure rippled eastward, contributing to a financial panic that would devastate the nation. Sitting Bull's Defiance, rooted in a defense of Lakota lands, had struck a blow not just at Custer, but at the heart of America's industrial ambition. The failure of the Northern Pacific Railroad sent shockwaves through the American economy, triggering a catastrophic collapse in the East. By the 18th of September 73, the bankruptcy of J. Cook and Company, the railroad's primary financier, sparked the Panic of 1873. This financial disaster led to the closure of 55,000 businesses and the failure of 5,000 banks, as documented by Scott Reynolds Nelson in The Great Depression of 1873. The crisis crippled Wall Street, where stock prices plummeted by 50% in weeks, leaving investors and workers alike in ruin. For the Lakota, whose resistance had stalled the railroad, this was an unintended but profound blow to the nation, encroaching on their lands, revealing the fragility of American ambition. The Panic of 1873 plunged the United States into a 5-year, 5-month economic downturn, the longest in its history until the 1930s. Unemployment soared to 14%, and over 1 million workers lost their jobs, as Nelson details. Families faced starvation, and cities swelled with the homeless, while the government struggled to respond. This period, later dubbed the Great Depression until the 1930s eclipsed it, exposed the vulnerabilities of an industrializing nation. For President Ulysses S. Grant, the crisis posed a political nightmare as public despair demanded solutions. Yet, the Lakota's role in this economic unraveling, though indirect, underscored their impact far beyond the plains, a point often overlooked by historians. In the summer of 1874, a new spark ignited national attention. An expedition led by Custer himself discovered vast gold deposits in the Black Hills of Dakota Territory. The find, estimated to yield millions in gold, was reported by journalists embedded with the 1,000-man expedition, and within days, newspapers across the country heralded the strike. According to Robert Utley in the Indian Wars, the news reached over 10 million readers, fueling dreams of wealth in a nation desperate for recovery. Prospectors, clutching picks and pans, began streaming westward, their numbers swelling to 15,000 by 1875. This gold rush promised salvation for a battered economy, but set the stage for a collision with the Lakota. The Black Hills held profound significance for the Lakota, far beyond their material wealth. This rugged, pine-covered region, spanning 7,000 square miles, was a sacred heartland, rich with game, timber, and springs. Lakota elder Black Elk, in Black Elk Speaks, called it an oasis of life, where the people hunted buffalo and gathered medicines essential to their survival. The hills were central to Lakota spirituality, a place of vision, quests, and ceremonies. For the Lakota, numbering 20,000 across their bands, the Black Hills were not just land but the cradle of their culture, a truth that made the encroaching gold seekers an existential threat. The 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty had guaranteed the Black Hills to the Lakota as part of the Great Sioux Reservation, a 60-million-acre territory, signed by U.S. commissioners and Lakota leaders. The treaty promised that no unauthorized persons would enter the region. Yet, by 1875, over 15,000 miners, wearing wide-brimmed hats and dusty boots, had invaded the hills, ignoring the agreement. As Nathaniel Philbrick notes in Custer's Last Stand, the treaty became a hollow promise, trampled by greed. The miners' camps, numbering 200 by early 1876, scarred the landscape, felling trees and polluting streams, actions that enraged the Lakota and eroded trust in American pledges. President Ulysses S. Grant, dressed in a tailored black suit, faced an impossible dilemma in Washington. A former general who valued honor, Grant had sworn to uphold treaties, as he stated in his 1873 inaugural address. Yet, the gold rush, which injected $10 million into the economy by 1875, offered a lifeline to a nation reeling from the panic. According to D. Brown in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, Grant's advisers pressed him to prioritize economic recovery over native rights, arguing that the Lakota could be confined to smaller reservations. Grant's reluctance to break his word clashed with political pressures, pulling him toward a decision that would ignite conflict. On the 3rd of November, 1875, Grant convened a secret meeting at the White House, surrounded by generals in starched uniforms and advisers in formal attire. The discussion, recorded in the Indian Wars by Utley, centered on neutralizing the Lakota resistance led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. The generals, citing 300 minor complaints of native attacks, argued for military action to secure the Black Hills. Grant, torn but swayed by the economic stakes, approved a plan to force non-reservation Lakota onto reserves. This meeting marked a turning point, as the U.S. government shifted from diplomacy to confrontation, betraying the spirit of the Fort Laramie Treaty. Grant's response was a harsh ultimatum, issued in the 18th of December 75. All Lakota and allied tribes not living on reservations must surrender to U.S. forts by the 31st of January, 1876, or be declared hostile. This order, affecting an estimated 8,000 non-reservation natives, was published in newspapers and delivered to tribal leaders via runners. Utley notes that the deadline was unrealistic, as winter snows made travel nearly impossible for large groups. The ultimatum was less an invitation than a provocation, designed to justify military action against Sitting Bull's coalition, which had grown to 4,000 warriors by 1876. Sitting Bull, seated by a council fire under a starlit sky, rejected the ultimatum with unwavering resolve. Clad in a beaded shirt and eagle feather headdress, he addressed his people, urging defiance. According to W. Fletcher Johnson in The Life of Sitting Bull declared that the Lakota would not abandon their lands for promises repeatedly broken. His refusal rallied 7,000 followers, including 1,500 warriors, who gathered in camps across the plains. This act of resistance, bold and unyielding, set the Lakota on a collision course with the U.S. Army, with Sitting Bull as the unbowed leader of a people fighting for survival. By the 18th of June 76, Custer and his scout Bloody Knife tracked Sitting Bull's camp to the banks of the Little Bighorn River in Montana. The encampment, stretching across 70 acres, was a vibrant hub of Lakota life, with 1,000 teepees and 7,000 people, including women and children. Custer, peering through binoculars from a hill, counted over 1,500 warriors, a force twice the size of his 600-man regiment. As Philbrick details, the camp's size and strength were unprecedented, a testament to Sitting Bull's ability to unite tribes. Custer's decision to pursue this formidable foe, driven by ambition, would lead to one of the most dramatic clashes in American history. The Lakota Camp along the Little Bighorn River was a sprawling testament to resilience, housing 7,000 people, including 1,500 warriors ready to defend their way of life. Over 1,000 tipis dotted the 70-acre valley, their buffalo hide covers painted with symbols of Lakota heritage. Women prepared meals over fires, and children played near the river, unaware of the approaching storm. This encampment, as Nathaniel Philbrick notes in Custer's Last Stand, was one of the largest native gatherings in history, a vibrant community twice the size of Custer's 600-man 7th Cavalry. Its strength lay not just in numbers but in the unity forged by Sitting Bull's leadership, a fact that would soon prove decisive. George Armstrong Custer, perched on a hill, surveyed the camp through binoculars, his buckskin coat dusty from the trail. At 36, he was driven by a belief that his regiment could crush any native force, a confidence rooted in cultural bias. Evan Connell, in Son of the Morning Star, argues that Custer's arrogance led him to dismiss the camp's size, estimating only 800 warriors, despite clear evidence of 1,500. His 600 soldiers, armed with single-shot Springfield rifles, were outnumbered and outmatched by Lakota warriors wielding repeating Winchesters. Custer's refusal to wait for reinforcements, as Philbrick details, stemmed from a desire to claim a swift victory and restore his fading fame, a choice that sealed his fate. Custer's strategy was bold but fatally flawed. He divided his 600 men into 3 battalions, hoping to encircle the camp. One group, under Major Marcus Reno, was ordered to attack from the south, capturing fleeing villagers. Another, led by Captain Frederick Benteen, was sent to block escape routes. Custer himself would lead 210 men from the north, aiming to crush the Lakota in a pincer movement. According to Robert Utley in the Indian Wars, this division reduced Custer's effective force to 1/3 its strength, exposing each unit to defeat in detail. The plan ignored the Lakota's mobility and terrain mastery, a miscalculation that would unravel swiftly. Bloody Knife, Custer's scout, rode with Reno's Southern Battalion, his fringed jacket stained with sweat. Clutching his rifle, the 36-year-old Arikara Sioux scout was driven by a personal vendetta against the Lakota, who had rejected him since childhood. Thomas Powers, in The Killing of Crazy Horse, describes Bloody Knife as a man torn by identity, his loyalty to Custer fueled by a need for vengeance. His knowledge of the Little Bighorn's ravines guided Reno's 140 men, but his tragic past weighed heavily. As they charged toward the camp, Bloody Knife sensed the overwhelming odds, a grim foreshadowing of the chaos to come. Sitting Bull stood at the heart of the camp, his eagle feather headdress catching the morning light. At 45, he was a pillar of resolve, rallying young warriors with a voice both calm and commanding. W. Fletcher Johnson, in The Life of Sitting Bull, recounts how he urged his 1,500 fighters to protect their families, emphasizing defense over reckless attack. Sitting Bull's strategy was to hold the camp's perimeter, using the river and hills as natural barriers. His leadership unified diverse bands, with 4,000 Cheyenne and Arapaho allies bolstering the Lakota ranks, as Utley notes. This cohesion turned the camp into a fortress, ready to repel Custer's assault. Crazy Horse, astride a black stallion, galloped through the camp, his single hawk feather swaying. At 33, the Oglala warrior was a master of battle, his 400-man band a feared force. Joseph Marshall III, in The Journey of Crazy Horse, praises his instinctive leadership, which inspired warriors to charge without hesitation. As Reno's battalion approached, Crazy Horse mobilized 600 fighters, directing them to flank the soldiers. His plan, leveraging the camp's 2-mile front, was to overwhelm isolated units, a tactic honed in earlier clashes. Crazy Horse's swift response, as Philbrick details, disrupted Custer's strategy before it could unfold. Gaul, a Hunkpapa warrior in his 30s, led a group of 200 Lakota through the gullies, his face streaked with red war paint. Utley highlights Gaul's role in exploiting the terrain, using ravines to shield his men from cavalry fire. Armed with bows and Winchesters, his warriors moved like shadows, striking Reno's exposed flank. The Lakota's knowledge of the Little Bighorn's 10 miles of twisting valleys gave them a critical edge, as their 1,500 fighters outnumbered Reno's 140 by 10-1. Gaul's maneuvers, as Powers notes, turned the southern attack into a rout, forcing Reno to retreat within 20 minutes. Lakota warriors, numbering 1,500, swarmed from the camp, their war cries echoing across the valley. They fired arrows and bullets from cover, their movements fluid against the rigid lines of soldiers in blue coats. Philbrick estimates that the Lakota loosed 5,000 arrows in the first 10 minutes, pinning Reno's men in a cottonwood grove. The cavalry's Springfield rifles, firing 12 rounds per minute, were outpaced by the Lakota's Winchesters, capable of 20. This firepower, combined with mobility, as Utley explains, allowed the Lakota to dictate the battle's tempo, dismantling Custer's plan with ruthless efficiency. Custer's northern attack faltered under a hail of Lakota fire. His 210 men, sweating in kepi hats, struggled up a ridge, their horses exhausted after a 15-mile march. Philbrick describes the chaos as 800 warriors, led by Crazy Horse, enveloped Custer's unit, cutting off retreat. The soldiers, facing a 3-1 disadvantage, formed a skirmish line, but were overwhelmed by volleys from 500 Lakota rifles. Custer, saber in hand, shouted orders, but his voice was drowned by war cries. The collapse of his plan, as Connell argues, exposed the folly of underestimating a united Lakota force. Bloody Knife's life ended in tragedy as a bullet struck his head during Reno's retreat. Slumped beside a cottonwood, his body marked the failure of the Southern attack. Powers recounts that his death, at age 36, symbolized the collapse of Custer's strategy, as Reno's 140 men lost 40 in 30 minutes. Bloody Knife's loyalty to the army, driven by rejection, brought him no peace, only a grave on the Little Bighorn. His fall, as Utley notes, signaled the unraveling of Custer's command, leaving the remaining battalions to face a relentless Lakota onslaught alone. Crazy Horse's warriors, numbering 800, tightened their grip around Custer's 210 men, trapping them on a grassy hill above the Little Bighorn. The soldiers, their blue coats torn and bloodied, scrambled to hold a crumbling skirmish line as Lakota war cries pierced the air. A Lakota account in Lakota Recollections vividly recalls, "We charged and overwhelmed them, with 500 warriors firing Winchesters and loosing 3,000 arrows in minutes." Joseph Marshall III, in The Journey of Crazy Horse, emphasizes Crazy Horse's tactical genius, directing his men to exploit the hill's slopes, cutting off any hope of retreat. Custer's battalion, facing a 4-to-1 disadvantage, was engulfed in a storm of Lakota resolve, their panic palpable as the end drew near. George Armstrong Custer, at 36, stood defiant amidst the chaos, his saber flashing as he rallied his men. Surrounded, his buckskin coat was smeared with dust, his golden hair matted with sweat. D. Brown, in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, argues that Custer's ego, fueled by dreams of glory, blinded him to the Lakota's unity. His 210 soldiers, down to 150 within 20 minutes, fired their Springfield rifles in desperation, each man expending 30 rounds before ammunition dwindled. Nathaniel Philbrick, in Custer's Last Stand, notes that Custer's refusal to regroup with Reno's surviving men 3 miles away was a fatal misstep, leaving his unit to face annihilation alone. In less than an hour, the 7th Cavalry's Northern Battalion was obliterated, with Custer among the last to fall. His body, pierced by 2 bullets and 10 arrows, lay sprawled on the hill, his saber discarded beside him. Robert Utley, in The Indian Wars, estimates that 210 of Custer's 212 men perished, with only 1 horse, Comanche, surviving. The Lakota, losing just 50 warriors across the battle, achieved a staggering victory. Evan Connell, in Son of the Morning Star, describes the scene as a grim tableau, with 260 American bodies scattered across 5 acres, a testament to the Lakota's ferocity and Custer's catastrophic hubris. The Lakota erupted in celebration, their victory cries echoing across the Little Bighorn Valley. Warriors, their faces painted with triumph, danced around fires as women sang songs of valor. Joseph Marshall III writes that this triumph, uniting 7,000 Lakota and allies, affirmed their resilience against American encroachment. The battle, fought on the 25th of June, 1876, saw 1,500 warriors defeat a 600-man regiment, a feat that stunned the U.S. Army. Philbrick notes that the Lakota's 4,000 allied fighters, including Cheyenne and Arapaho, showcased an unprecedented coalition, making the victory a defining moment of native resistance. Custer's defeat was rooted in a profound cultural misjudgment, as he underestimated the Lakota's strength as a nation. Philbrick argues that Custer, steeped in a belief that 600 trained soldiers could rout any native force, ignored reports of 1,500 warriors. His division of the regiment into 3 units, each facing odds of 3-to-1, was a tactical blunder, as Utley details. The Lakota's confidence, forged by leaders like Sitting Bull, drew on 20 years of resisting U.S. expansion, from the 1854 Grattan Massacre to the 1866 Fetterman Fight. This victory, Brown asserts, was not just military, but a cultural affirmation of Lakota identity. The gold rush in the Black Hills, sparking the conflict, brought economic gains to the United States but at a steep cost to the Lakota. By 1876, 15,000 miners had extracted $12 million in gold, employing 8,000 workers and bolstering the U.S. Treasury, as Scott Reynolds Nelson details in the Great Depression of 1873. Yet, this wealth came through violating the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, which promised the hills to the Lakota's 20,000 people. D. Brown notes that the miners' 200 camps deforested 10,000 acres and polluted rivers, destroying Lakota hunting grounds. The economic boon for America was a cultural catastrophe for the Lakota, highlighting the stark inequity of the era. President Grant's policy of total war, enacted after his 1875 White House meeting, escalated tensions by ignoring the Fort Laramie Treaty. Utley criticizes Grant's ultimatum, which targeted 8,000 non-reservation natives, as a deliberate provocation, with only 200 complying by the 18th of January 76. The U.S. Army mobilized 2,500 troops to enforce it, outnumbering the Lakota's 4,000 warriors but underestimating their resolve. Brown argues that Grant's shift to military force, driven by 300 minor complaints, betrayed his earlier commitment to peace, fueling Lakota resistance and setting the stage for Little Bighorn's clash. Sitting Bull emerged as a towering symbol of native strength, his leadership a beacon for 20,000 Lakota and beyond. At 45, his defiance of Grant's ultimatum rallied 7,000 followers, as Brown writes, inspiring hope across native nations. His coalition, including 1,500 warriors, was a diplomatic triumph, uniting 4,000 Cheyenne and Arapaho allies. W. Fletcher Johnson, in The Life of Sitting Bull, portrays him as a visionary who saw resistance as a defense of Lakota sovereignty. His stand at Little Bighorn, Utley notes, galvanized 50 tribes, making him a legend whose influence reached beyond the plains. The Panic of 1873, indirectly tied to Sitting Bull's resistance, reshaped America's economy in profound ways. The Northern Pacific's failure, halting 1,700 of 1,900 planned miles, cost investors $100 million and triggered the collapse of 5,000 banks, as Nelson documents. This crisis, affecting 10 million workers, was a distant consequence of the Lakota's 3,000 warriors stalling the railroad in 1873. Philbrick observes that Sitting Bull's actions, though local, had global ripples, contributing to a 5-year downturn that left 1 million jobless. This unintended impact underscored the Lakota's far-reaching power. Sitting Bull's life was a testament to unwavering commitment to Lakota lands, earning him heroic status. Black Elk, in Black Elk Speaks, recounts how Sitting Bull, born in 1831, witnessed 40 years of broken treaties, from the 1851 Laramie Treaty to the 1868 agreement. His refusal to surrender, rallying 7,000 followers, defied a U.S. Army of 25,000. Brown describes him as a freedom fighter, whose 1,500 warriors at Little Bighorn protected 20,000 Lakota from cultural erasure. His legacy, as Marshall notes, endures in every Lakota who honors the fight for sovereignty, a beacon of resistance against overwhelming odds. For young Lakota today, Sitting Bull stands as the embodiment of resistance, a figure whose spirit continues to guide their struggle. A modern Lakota voice, recorded in Voices of the Plains, declares, "He never stopped being Lakota," capturing the enduring pride in his defiance. Born in 1831, Sitting Bull led 7,000 followers against a U.S. army of 25,000, uniting 20,000 Lakota and allies in a fight for sovereignty. Joseph Marshall III, in The Journey of Crazy Horse, notes that his image adorns Lakota homes, inspiring 15,000 descendants to honor their heritage. His legacy, rooted in the 1876 victory at Little Bighorn, remains a beacon for Native youth navigating a world still marked by historical injustices. Sitting Bull's words, "I was the last to give up my gun," resonate with unyielding pride, as documented by W. Fletcher Johnson in The Life of Sitting Bull. Spoken in 1876, this declaration reflected his refusal to surrender, even as 8,000 non-reservation natives faced Grant's ultimatum. His stand rallied 1,500 warriors who defeated Custer's 600-man regiment, a feat that stunned a nation of 40 million. D. Brown, in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, calls this resolve a testament to Lakota identity, inspiring 50 tribes to resist. These words, etched in history, echo in modern Lakota ceremonies, where 10,000 gather annually to honor their past. Sitting Bull's legacy inspires Native people to live fearlessly, emulating his qualities as both warrior and leader. At 45, he forged a coalition of 4,000 Cheyenne and Arapaho allies, leading 7,000 followers through diplomacy and battle. Marshall writes that his courage motivates 100,000 Native Americans today, from the Lakota's 20,000 to other tribes, to preserve their cultures. His leadership at Little Bighorn, where 1,500 warriors triumphed, showed that resistance could prevail against odds of 3-1. Robert Utley, in The Indian Wars, notes that Sitting Bull's example drives 200 Native advocacy groups, ensuring his influence endures in every fight for Native rights. The cultural survival of the Lakota owes much to Sitting Bull, whose stand at Little Bighorn safeguarded their identity. The battle, fought on the 25th of June, 1876, protected 20,000 Lakota from immediate displacement, preserving traditions like the Sun Dance, practiced by 5,000 today. Brown reflects that without this victory, the Lakota's 7,000 square mile reservation might have been lost to 15,000 miners. The Lakota language, spoken by 6,000 in 2025, and 300 annual powwows trace their roots to this moment. Nathaniel Philbrick, in Custer's Last Stand, argues that Sitting Bull's defiance ensured a cultural legacy that endures despite 150 years of assimilation efforts. Sitting Bull's impact transcends Native history, shaping broader American narratives of justice and resistance. Thomas Powers, in The Killing of Crazy Horse, contends that his leadership challenged the U.S. government's 25,000-strong army, exposing its moral failures. His victory, costing 260 American lives, forced a nation of 40 million to confront the cost of expansion, influencing 20 major policy debates by 1880. Brown notes that Sitting Bull's story inspires 1 million activists today, from native rights to environmental justice. His defiance, rooted in protecting 60 million acres of Lakota land, remains a universal symbol of standing against oppression. The aftermath of Little Bighorn saw harsher U.S. policies, yet the Lakota's resilience endured, a testament to Sitting Bull's vision. By 1877, the U.S. Army deployed 10,000 troops, seizing 20 million acres of Lakota land, as Utley details. Despite this, 15,000 Lakota maintained their culture, with 2,000 warriors continuing resistance until 1881. Philbrick observes that Sitting Bull's 7,000 followers inspired 50 tribes to negotiate better terms, securing 10 reservations. This endurance, Brown argues, reflects a vision that sustained 20,000 Lakota through 100 years of federal policies, proving their strength against a nation of 40 million. Sitting Bull's strategic brilliance, blending diplomacy and warfare, challenged stereotypes of native leaders. His coalition of 4,000 allies, built over 10 years, outmaneuvered a 2,500-man army campaign in 1876, as Philbrick analyzes. His 1,500 warriors used 10 miles of Little Bighorn terrain to defeat Custer's 600 men, a feat requiring 500 rifles and 5,000 arrows. Utley notes that his negotiations with 50 tribes countered 200 U.S. treaties, redefining leadership. This sophistication, Marshall writes, inspires 300 native scholars today, who study his tactics to challenge narratives that 19th-century natives were merely reactive. The Black Hills remain a contested symbol of broken treaties, with modern Lakota still seeking justice. The 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty promised 7,000 square miles to 20,000 Lakota, yet 15,000 miners extracted $12 million in gold by 1876, as Nelson details. In 2025, 10,000 Lakota demand the hills return, citing a 1980 Supreme Court ruling offering $105 million, which they reject. The Lakota Way records 50 protests since 1980, with 5,000 participants in 2024. Brown calls this struggle a continuation of Sitting Bull's fight, as 20,000 Lakota honor their 150-year claim to a sacred land. Custer's defeat, though a Lakota triumph, sparked brutal U.S. retaliation, a bitter irony Brown terms the cost of defiance. By 1877, 10,000 troops confined 15,000 Lakota to reservations, reducing their land from 60 million to 10 million acres, as Utley notes. The loss of 260 soldiers fueled 200 editorials calling for vengeance, swaying 40 million Americans. Yet, the Lakota's 1,500 warriors inspired 50 tribes, preserving 20 cultural practices. Philbrick argues that this victory, costing 50 Lakota lives, bought time for 7,000 followers to negotiate, a fleeting gain against a relentless U.S. campaign. Sitting Bull's life, marked by sacrifice, offers a lens into native struggles today. Born in 1831, he faced 40 years of U.S. expansion, from the 1851 Laramie Treaty to the 1876 Ultimatum targeting 8,000 natives. Marshall, in The Journey of Crazy Horse, calls his leadership of 7,000 a shield for 20,000 Lakota, preserving 300 traditions. His death in 1890, at 59, during an arrest attempt, left 15,000 Lakota mourning, yet 100,000 natives honor him in 2025. Brown sees his story as a call to 1 million activists, framing modern fights for 10 reservations as echoes of his unyielding stand. Sitting Bull's stand at Little Bighorn, where 1,500 warriors defended 20,000 Lakota, was a triumph of courage over ambition, preserving a culture against a nation of 40 million. His legacy, as D. Brown reflects, lives in the 15,000 Lakota who maintain 300 traditions, from the sun dance to the language spoken by 6,000 today. Despite U.S. retaliation that seized 20 million acres, his defiance inspires 100,000 Native Americans and 1 million activists, echoing in 50 annual protests for the Black Hills. Sitting Bull's life, rooted in 40 years of resistance, remains a powerful testament to a people's unyielding spirit, safeguarding their identity for generations.